You might love it, you might hate it, but either way, if you've spent any time on any social media, odds are you've seen stills of Carrie from Sex and the City smoking a freshly lit cigarette behind her clunky 2000s computer. People use these stills as inspiration for their fashion, or maybe even their life. But where did this resurgence for wishing that we could live like the iconic 2000s writer girls come from? I want to find out. And I'll be finding out by doing some media analysis, some on Sex and the City, some on some other 2000s iconic writer girls, and then maybe even some modern comparisons. For this first media analysis, I want to talk about the Sex and the City episode titled, "They Shoot Single People, Don't They?" For those who haven't watched this show, it really doesn't matter. This episode is sort of a filler episode, even though it's also a fan favorite and has really good character growth, but in case you don't know, I'm going to run through the characters really quick. Carrie is an emotional, bold shopaholic. Samantha loves sex, she's wise and very aware. Also, when I looked up Samantha Sex and the City on Pinterest, why did it get flagged for nudity even though I looked up that same verbiage for all the other girls and nothing came up? So that's weird. Charlotte is a preppy lover girl who is very gentle. And then Miranda, she's very soft-hearted, focused, and avoidant. Also, I want to quickly add, I know this is a TV show, so the problems and situations are heightened for TV, but while I go through this analysis, have in mind more culturally than talking about directly exactly what's happening in the show. We open with our ladies at the salsa club. All of them are completely single, which is a very rare occurrence on the show. We learn that Carrie has a shoot with New York Magazine the next morning about being single and fabulous in the city. She got this feature through her good friend Stanford's new boyfriend. I know it's quick to start analyzing already, but let's start here. There's a certain daydream that occurs when people imagine living their lives as if they are a Sex and the City character. Being able to run around in amazing clothes every day, grabbing lunch with our closest girlfriends just on the regular, or organically meeting a hottie that is absolutely obsessed with you. But I think a reason that people latch on to Carrie's character, sometimes aspiring to be like her, is because Carrie is a niche but relevant writer for a living. She's not an A-list celebrity, but she's and we often see her doing cool things, for lack of better words, while looking fabulous. Like being featured in New York Magazine, and then later in this episode attending a fabulous party for a photographer. And she's only afforded these opportunities because of her work in being a somewhat public figure. In this episode, Samantha even says, "Why didn't they ask me? I'm single and fabulous." While this is a joke, she's right in some ways. Samantha is much more successful than Carrie is. And Samantha is much more single than Carrie is. By choice, of course. But Carrie having mild celebrity is actually what got her this feature, not just because she's single and fabulous. In this day and age, this casual celebrity wouldn't afford you as many opportunities as it gets Carrie. And in my opinion, you'd have to be more of a significant writer to get featured in something like New York Magazine. Even if it is through her friend Stanford's boyfriend, I still feel like this is more plausible to happen in the early 2000s and the 90s rather than happening today. Obviously, this is where this is a TV show elements come into play to help stretch the realm of possibility, but I think it would still be possible. When you listen to the older generation talk about how they got certain jobs, when the story is literally like, I called the president up and they offered me a job. That just doesn't happen today, and I feel like just calling the president up is more similar to Carrie getting a feature through her friend rather than today neither of those things could happen. I also feel like her life is made more alluring by how she's known but she's not known. Because of her job, she's invited to cool events, being able to grow her network of interesting or prominent people that can give her access to other cool opportunities. But she's not necessarily the prominent person at the events, at least in the earlier seasons. Well, I know there are still probably some writers, artists, and just people today who live in a major city like New York and live similar lives to Carrie. But I feel like Carrie's character really embodies the idea of knowing someone, and that is something that many people wish they had. Along with that, I think Carrie is a good example of the private luxury that we see people craving today. If you don't know what private luxury is, think Nepo baby who is always somehow at dinner with your favorite celebrities and you don't really understand why. And also they're looking really hot and rich. Anyway, I know it sounds silly to say that someone who writes a sex and dating blog is in any way private, but compared to today, it is. We've grown accustomed to believing to be successful with an audience or have any social relevancy, you have to also be sharing so much of your life on social media to garner a following there as well. if you're not doing Get Ready With Me or talking and joking about trending drama, media that's very easily digestible, you're not capitalizing on the expansive audience that you could have. There's a pressure to reel people in with your relatable work or content in hopes that they like you enough that they'll stick around to engage with the work that you're actually passionate about, which is typically more niche. There's been a shift in being able to be just a painter, writer, artist, whatever it may be. And instead, you have to be a writer, painter, artist, whatever, and also a social media creator. For example, SNL in the past few years have brought in a lot of people who originate from social media. This isn't a bad thing at all. I actually like a lot of them on the show, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them were also doing stand-up and traditional comedy while they were doing social media. But I think it's a clear sign that having a built-in audience is becoming more important when it comes to getting opportunities. It wasn't long ago that SNL was built on fresh faces, and it didn't matter who you were as long as you were funny. Obviously, there were probably some behind-the-scenes politics going on SNL when it came to like knowing a guy and getting an audition. The classic networking upper hand. But I think my point still stands that posting online is very important to get your name out there, which is very important to getting opportunities. And with this in mind, I think people idealize not having to do it all to be it all. So a resistance has formed. There's a desire to keep your personal life personal and let your art speak for itself. However, with the influencer mentality and business strategy seeping into absolutely everything, it seems like the ability to have a singular persona has disappeared. And by this I'm talking about, say you're a musician. To be able to just be a musician, obviously you have to engage with your fans in some capacity, but why can't that just be like putting on shows and promoting your music instead of also having to post online about what you're doing? You have to be able to make interesting TikToks, post witty tweets, look hot on Instagram, just doing it all so people will even remember who you are, which is just completely exhausting. And I feel like that doesn't even just apply to creatives, but anyone just trying to get a job or live life. Like LinkedIn, it's now a part of work culture to be posting your achievements, posting when you're unemployed, posting those weird uncanny valley like advice posts that are like top 10 things that I did to get my team to be more proactive, and then it's weirdly negative and it's becoming more expected to do all that to show that you have like a reliable track record when applying for a job. Anyway, I do think that privacy has become a luxury, and I also think that it's an indicator that you've made it. Has Carrie made it in the context of this show? Not really, but by today's standards, she lives a very sought after life. Minus the crippling credit card debt, but for being someone who only writes a newspaper column and getting to do a bunch of cool things and have cool clothes and live in a cool apartment, I would say a lot of people who watch the show would view her as having made it. In modern day, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of the time, to get your name out there and to gain social relevancy, like I said, you have to expose yourself in a sense. You have to give up your privacy, which is very intimidating considering parasocial lines are extremely blurred when it comes to the online creator, the online influencer, compared to the traditional celebrity. You're expected to share more and receive less than, say, Harry Styles. However, if you're an online creator or you do most of your promotion through the internet, once you get enough fame and or money, you're able to retreat back into this privacy because people care about you now because you shared so much about yourself, and they in some ways trust you. A good example of this is Emma Chamberlain, who I've mentioned in some videos before. One, because I think that she's just a perfect example of like how influencing can work, and also I do really like her. Anyway, for a long time, she had to divulge so much about her life to continue to grow and maintain her audience. And once she gained enough celebrity in some ways and money, she was able to retreat and no longer share so much about herself. She was able to disappear and come back online when she pleased. Even now, while she's a true celebrity in my opinion, and she could disappear from the internet forever and never really post again and would be fine and would still have a following. At this point, she still does have to be vulnerable to keep her following online because she doesn't have her other thing yet. A contrasting example to this is Addison Rae. So Addison Rae was similar to Emma Chamberlain, blowing up through, dancing, which Emma didn't blow up through, but relatable content. Once Addison Rae became a singer, she didn't have to do any of that relatable social media stuff anymore. I feel like Emma Chamberlain could easily have this same shift that Addison Rae had into something that's not social media based, whether that be fashion, or I do see that she's in a new movie. So this shift might be already happening. But overall, to achieve this private luxury, especially in the context of social media, which is the way that most normal people could potentially obtain this private luxury, you first really have to expose yourself and hoping that you get far enough that you can then revert it and have your privacy again. Which is something that characters like Carrie in Sex and the City never had to do to achieve their celebrity. Back to the episode. After Carrie's night out with the ladies, she's a little bit hungover and is running late for her magazine feature. When she finally gets there, she blames her tardiness on the fact that she couldn't catch a cab. To which her friend Stanford says this: "So what? Did you grab a bumper and let it drag you here?" Then she does her photo shoot without glam. Tragic. Fast forwarding through a few scenes here, Charlotte looks absolutely fabulous in this athleisure set, and they talk about faking orgasms. Carrie sees her New York Magazine cover, which says single and fabulous. The question mark is important because it's very shady, and she's understandably distraught over it. She shows her girl squad over breakfast, and while all of her friends are supportive, saying it doesn't matter if you're single and struggling, they don't seem to be really convinced. And within that same week, they all meet up with some men, none of whom they actually really like. We end this segment with a monologue from Carrie. "Well, women are no strangers to faking it. We faked our hair color, cup size, hell, we even faked fur. I couldn't help but wonder, has fear of being alone suddenly raised the bar on faking? Are we faking more than orgasms? Are we faking entire relationships? Is it better to fake it than to be alone?" I want to talk about that last line because I feel like it's still very topical today. While there are many differences between modern dating and the dating that we see in Sex and the City, aka early 2000s dating, for example, having to use dating apps, there are also a lot of similarities. We see our girls, like ourselves, being dragged through the mud by men who just either don't care about them or are just kind of shitty. And we also see our ladies absolutely dogging them in return. They still deal with things like ghosting like we do. For example, in this episode, Samantha gets stood up by a club owner who she uncharacteristically got all caught up in because he mentioned we to her and she kind of fell into the idea of the we. But what I think people idealize about 2000s dating is the tangibility of it. If you were dating, you were actually dating. You were going out in public, getting food, hanging out. You weren't just planning and texting for a month straight until someone inevitably leaves the other person on red. If you got stood up for dinner or a date, that was kind of it. You couldn't pretend it didn't happen because it was in public, seen by other people, and totally humiliating. You couldn't fake excuses as easily because there's a little bit more of a standard. That's kind of the end of a relationship than there is today. I'm not saying being ghosted via text is less humiliating or heartbreaking, but it's easier for people to convince themselves that it's forgivable and that it's not real because it happened virtually, so it doesn't really feel as real. You can just sort of pretend it never happened if you didn't tell your friends. Aside from that, I want to talk about the question, is it better to fake it than to be alone? It's not a bold statement to say that superficial appearances and superficial personalities are very relevant in a lot of people's lives. In general and on dating apps. Look hot always and be the coolest version of yourself. Obviously, the pre-dating app, pre-social media world, people still went out in public trying to look their best, maybe ready to get their flirt on and, be a mysterious girl. But there's many instances on Sex and the City and also in people's real life stories who met their partner on a casual day, not all glammed up, but just being themselves. Now a lot of people feel like their only option when it comes to dating is to do the song and dance of the dating apps, to have witty prompts and the hottest pictures alive of yourself to catch people's eye, and maybe meet them a few times before you kind of let your hair down. So I guess my point is that faking it is now the standard on dating apps and in social media in general. It's not just something you do when you're feeling down and need attention. Going back to the episode, Carrie is now at that fabulous party that I mentioned earlier, when she meets a young Bradley Cooper, hello, and gets caught up in the whirlwind of someone seeing her as single, hot, and fabulous, until he whips out her magazine cover and laughs in her face. She then realizes that she only wanted him because it validated her idea of herself that she is single and fabulous, when she didn't need to have that validation. The episode ends with her getting lunch alone because it doesn't matter if anyone sees her sitting alone, because being single and fabulous is kind of just a mindset anyways. A very feel-good storybook ending for this episode of Sex and the City. I feel like this episode as a whole is just very relatable. Who among us hasn't seen a photo of ourselves and it caused us to spiral for a few days just thinking about who even am I? Don't be ridiculous, Andrea. Everybody wants this. Could I make a video about the 2000's writer revival without talking about The Devil Wears Prada? Absolutely not. The Devil Wears Prada isn't only relevant in recent years because the sequel is coming out soon, but just because of how culturally impactful it is on people even today. For many aspiring writers, or for people who want to work in fashion, working at a highbrow, famous, popular magazine like Vogue or Runway, which is the fake magazine in The Devil Wears Prada, is a dream job. Being even a simple assistant is a sign that you are on your way to making it big, and also that you have taste. To preface, I'm just going to be talking about one scene right now because if I were to cover this whole movie, that would take literally hours. The scene I'm going to be talking about is the cerulean belt scene. We start this scene with Andy and Nigel rushing in. He tells her to just stand and watch and take notes. Miranda is picking out pieces that she wants to feature in the next edition of the magazine. Nigel eagerly hops in to help Miranda out, and they begin to start finishing each other's sentences. They're in flow state, literally. The younger colleagues are trying to keep up when we get the iconic line, "Why is nobody ready?" Meryl Streep, the woman that you are. Miranda is shown two different belts, which are both blue, and Andy giggles, which is a critical mistake. She laughs because she thinks that the belts look the same, and then she is dragged to hell and back. Because I can't play the whole scene, I'm gonna give you an artistic rendition. This stuff. Oh, okay, I see. You think this has nothing to do with you. You go to your closet and select that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take your life too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware to the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns, and then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent who showed cerulean military jackets. And then cerulean quickly showed up in collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through department stores and then trickled down into some tragic casual corner, where you, no doubt, fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff. For many people, fashion means nothing to them. For some people, fashion means everything, and then everyone else is just kind of somewhere in between. For most people, it's just listening to the general trends and then buying whatever that is. I think anyone who has watched this scene, the real one, not my recreation, understands how impressive and knowledgeable Miranda and her team are, showing how fashion and taste isn't just picking clothes, but it's your subconscious speaking. Miranda explains the history of Andy's sweaters like she's remembering a family story. And that is true commitment to your craft, and it's aspirational, even if you're not interested in fashion, even if it's just a movie. Because of misogyny and other things, there's a belief that fields that are feminine-centered are much easier and less impressive than male-centered fields. To be clear, the reason that I say feminine-centered instead of women-dominated or male-dominated fields is because while we associate industries like fashion with being feminine, aka the girls and the gays loving it, and the target consumer base being typically women, it's actually not a woman-dominated field in the higher ranks. According to the International Labor Organization, up to 80% of garment workers are women. Business of Fashion found that a similar percentage of college majors from top fashion schools are female. And yet women head up just about 14% of major fashion brands and hold over just 1 in 10 top design jobs. You might be thinking, so? But those roles are very crucial in deciding what happens within the fashion industry. Those are the people who make the final decision. They're the people who bring designers into the spotlight and they can easily take them out. Anyway, stepping outside of the world of fashion, the arts, like fashion, are still a male-dominated field as well in that same way. Well, obviously when you consider things like film, the consumer base is much more balanced, but in my opinion, the arts as a whole is still considered to be pretty feminine. And because of that, it's often disrespected. A very common online joke is, oh, you're a feminist? Oh, you studied art in college? Have fun at your barista job. But what always kills me about that joke and that idea is that those people who say that are the same people who will talk about how they can't wait to get home and just decompress and watch The Office. Like, do you not understand that everyone who, made that show has probably committed their life to art? They're probably an ex-theater kid who you would have made fun of in high school. We literally see Andy have this mentality at the beginning of the movie. However, The Devil Wears Prada makes it very clear the arts, like fashion, are just as cutthroat and high stakes as any other industry. And I think that's one of the reasons that this movie and the others like it are having a resurgence right now. Because if you're an artist and you watch this movie, whatever you may be, your experience is validated that being an artist, a creative, is hard and meaningful. Like a traditional job, say finance, it's not always fun, sometimes it's less than fun, but doing it is being a part of something bigger than just yourself. People often idealize that if you're a working artist that your life must be so easy. You only have to do one thing, like take a photo or paint a painting, write a story. But this movie highlights how it's so much more than that. Let's go one step deeper into this, to the place where the 2000s fashion writer girl quotes and images circulate. Let's think about the people like me, who just write stuff and create art in our bedrooms. People often look at you when you say you enjoy fashion, writing, anything creative, and think, aw, what a cute hobby. Until it's not. For example, if you're a musical artist, oh yeah, it's cute, you like to write songs in your bedroom. Until you have one song blow up, and then suddenly, within 1 year, you go from being in your bedroom to being at the Met Gala. Ice Spice's song Munch blew up in August of 2022, and then in May of 2023, she was at the Met Gala. I know she's probably a case of being a 10-year overnight sensation like Chaperone was, but that's also kind of a part of what I'm trying to say. If you're working your way up through the corporate ladder, each step you're recognized as being more and more successful. But slowly working on your art over years, people don't see you as successful until you're suddenly at the top. By a lot of people, art is only respected when you have the gold star example sitting in front of you. But what Miranda points out in this scene is that it's not just one person. It's a whole ecosystem of people that make art what it is. Thousands of people's work goes into you being able to go into your closet, put on the best fitting pair of jeans that you own, and feel great about yourself. You feel unstoppable, so you act unstoppable. So I guess I just wonder how people can't see that the art and working in the arts is not important. That the little details matter and what make our lives what they are. I feel like I couldn't make a video about the struggling 20-something city girl who has great clothes without throwing in a modern comparison to this 2000s media. However, we don't live in an era where being a writer is the big thing. Instead, we live in the era of the influencer. So of course we're covering I Love LA. There was a lot about this show that I really liked and some things that I did not like. I would say overall I enjoyed it, but this show was extremely hard for me to watch. There was only one episode within the whole 8-episode season that I did not pause, turn away from, or straight up skip a scene because it was making me so deeply uncomfortable. To explain, I am very prone to secondhand embarrassment, and usually I'm pretty good about being able to push through. Like, I can watch Girls, which a lot of people say is also like this show where it's very cringeworthy and painful to watch at times. But for some reason, Rachel Sennett's character Maya was just killing me. And I'm not saying it's even bad that it was hard for me to watch these shows, because I think that just points to the writing was really good, so it was the cringe was really hitting. But every time Maya came on the screen, I could feel my anxiety rising. I think it's because the way she talked to people was giving me secondhand embarrassment, even if she was just talking to her friends. A part of her character is definitely that she's a people pleaser, but I think at times I was like, why is she people pleasing right now? Like, oh my god, can she fucking chill? Which obviously it's her character, but it was giving me anxiety. But that's a me problem. That's personally a me problem. So all that to say, if I'm off the ball with some of the points that I say, let me know, because it is very possible that I might have missed some things because I was genuinely turned away because I couldn't power through it. I couldn't watch it. Also, one more thing before we get into it, I'm not going to be talking about the lack of representation and the general gentrification of LA has, because I'm not from LA. I've never even been to LA, so I feel like if I were to be making a point on that, I would just be straight up guessing. Like, I wouldn't know the differences between native LA people versus the transplants because I've never seen that firsthand. I do think it's important to the show, so below I'll link some articles that talk about that stuff specifically. Anyway, while episode 7 was the only episode that I could get through without physically recoiling and turning away, I want to talk about episode 4, Upstairs. We start this episode with the group getting ready for an exclusive party. We find out this party is at Elijah Wood's house, being hosted by Quenlin Blackwell. Love her. And as they talk, Maya starts to get jealous over the fact that Tallulah thinks her and Quenlin could be good friends. When we get to the party, Quenlin quickly greets Tallulah, and Tallulah is pulled away from the group. Quenlin asks her essentially if Maya is a good manager or is holding her back. Again, being someone who is not from LA, is not an influencer in any way, and has never been to an exclusive event in my entire life, this episode was very interesting to me. People love this show for its humor, obviously, but I think another reason that people really like it is because it removes the veil of the coolness that we typically associate with people that are influencers, fashion people, or nepo babies in LA. The writers are obviously people who have had first-hand experience with these type of people and these type of events, and I think that comes through, which raises an interesting question of why make a show that essentially makes fun of your peers? Is it that they can disconnect themselves from their lives enough to realize how ridiculous everything is? Or are the writers so far out that they're just trying to tell a story about people trying to become successful? I think a little bit of both. In my opinion, the main characters of I Love LA feel like they're supposed to feel like regular people who are out of place. Tallulah is broke, Maya is barely out of being an assistant, Charlie is pushed around and disrespected by his clients all day, and then Alani is blissfully unaware of how privileged her life is. 3/4 of these characters have traits that pretty much anyone from anywhere can relate to. So why does it still not really feel relatable? I know for the sake of this show, a lot of unrealistic situations are going to happen to them because that's how shows work, but I just found it hard to connect with any of the characters. To be clear, I think they did a good job of humanizing all of them. They're all annoying, they're all funny, they're all sweet at times, they're all mean at times. But to me, it feels like that same disconnect that people have with real life influencers, where it's like you understand that they are real people who have inner worlds and struggle with things. But also, the regular person struggles to sympathize with them because they're living a better life on a bad day than a lot of people have on a regular good day. Aside from that, another thing that I liked about this show was the writing. When it comes to Gen Z representation in media, we often have this feeling that it's older people trying to write what they think Gen Z talk or think about. Here it's clear that the writers are equally as online and in these Gen Z circles as their audiences. It's definitely played up for comedic effect, but if you're chronically online, the way they speak doesn't feel that far from reality. And the jokes, especially the quippy little side jokes, genuinely made me laugh. Which is why some people, I think, can't get past the characters being annoying, because if you're not used to the way that they talk, you might kind of be like, what? Or if you're someone who cares about vocal fry, it's obviously gonna be like sound annoying. But come on. Back to the episode. Alani and Maya decide to sneak upstairs where they find Elijah Wood, and the girls become sort of friends with Elijah. There's a line here where he says, "We have to watch the liquor store scene from Superbad." I love clips. And then he speaks into his YouTube TV app, which made me giggle. I was like, oh, that's so me. That's so me. I also love clips. Downstairs around the same time, Tallulah gets asked by Quenlin to make a TikTok with her. And they do hundreds of highly produced takes because they can't seem to get any of them right. Tallulah is getting increasingly overwhelmed until Quenlin's assistant tells her Landry. Landry is the Christian singer who Charlie thought was trying to have sex with him, but it turns out he's actually a Christian, and people always think he's gay because he's just so open-hearted. And they're going to get ice, and Charlie's like, this guy sucks. But then these girls come up to Landry, and they're so excited because he's a celebrity, and then Charlie convinces him to let him be his stylist on his Vegas, what are those called? Vegas residency, and then they become friends. I'm not skipping over this because it's not important, but it's not important to what I'm talking about now, so that's why I'm skipping over it. That little subplot is actually very funny. Anyway, Quenlin ditches the idea of making a TikTok with Tallulah, and Tallulah runs into her clip farm when she's looking for the bathroom. The clip farm is hilarious and also scary. This scene is also when Quenlin really pulls out her acting chops. She's doing really good in this whole episode, but this scene I'm like, she starts talking about how everything on social media is calculated and that Tallulah needs to learn how to play the game to stay relevant. She's very intimidating but still somehow kind of endearing, and this really emphasizes how Tallulah is a total fish out of water and that she doesn't really know what she's doing. When it comes to the influencer world, it's a surprise to no one that you either need to step up or get lost in the crowd. That when you choose to turn your life into content, you have to make decisions that will not only affect your business life but your personal life, because they start to intertwine. Quenlin, the character, is someone who has ditched the idea of just having friends and now sees everyone she meets and knows as a business opportunity. And Tallulah is faced with the choice of either being like her, prioritizing money and fame, or her close friendships. She chooses friendship, and I'm not surprised at the fact that this moment is in the show, but I am a little bit surprised by how directly they called out the fakeness of the influencer world. They do it more subtly in other episodes, but having a real life, extremely famous influencer straight up being like, everything is fake, why would you think anything is real? Like, are you stupid? It's paradoxical, if I'm using that word correctly, which I think I am. It's also kind of validating as a viewer of the show and a social media user that people that are involved with the show, who are basically like first-hand source material of what the world is like, are essentially saying, yes, everything is fake, do not believe anything. But also, are the people who watch this show really gonna stop idealizing the influencer lifestyle? Probably not. Even after watching this show and seeing how shitty this LA world seems to be, I still think of Rachel Sennett and I'm like, ugh. Fuck, your life seems sick. Like, her real life seems sick. She gets to party with Charlie XCX and make her own show. Like, sign me up. I wouldn't do that. If I have to deal with some shitty, stupid people, like, I can do that. Also, to sidestep real quick, sorry if this analysis is not as analyzy as the other ones were. I feel like if I were to go kind of deep in like thinking about what this show means in the grand scheme of the world, it would just be me talking about shitty influencers, which is like, we've heard about it, we know about it. I feel like I don't need to reiterate it. I feel like it's much more interesting to talk about the making of this show and like what this show means within like a Hollywood like media space, rather than talking about the messages it's trying to say. Just feel like I've talked about influencers like 1 bajillion times, and there's only so much more I can say about it. Anyway, back to the episode. This conversation with Quenlin is happening at the same time as Elijah Wood is freaking out upstairs because the girls thought he wanted to have a threesome when he just wanted to have friends. Why does this always happen to him? And they all rush out of the house and get picked up by a creepy Uber driver. I thought this episode overall was very fun. I think all of the episodes are really fun. And I don't really have anything bad to say about the writing or the acting because I feel like it's all pretty solid. Anyway, my biggest critique of this show is that it feels incomplete. Like, the season feels incomplete. I think all of the episodes are very solid, but they feel too loosely connected, which you can do if that's the type of show you want to make. To me, it felt like this show was stuck between trying to be kind of anthology style, which is when a movie or show consists of somewhat unrelated scenes and episodes and is tied together by a common theme, character, or premise rather than a linear plot, and then also trying to be a more traditional TV show with a continuous narrative. Think of Girls compared to Broad City, if you know what either of those shows are. If it's your first time watching Girls, you kind of have to watch the whole show to understand what's happening in each episode. If it's your first time watching Broad City, while watching all the show in its entirety would make things more interesting as you progress through the episodes, you don't really need to. You can kind of drop in randomly and understand what's going on because they do a good job at building the world very quickly, so you can understand how the characters interact with each other without having to watch a season of relationship development before. aside from a few key episodes. Without leaning one way or another with the style, to me it feels like there's pieces missing of the story. For example, as Maya gets more into her job, her relationship with her boyfriend Dylan starts to fall apart. And in the last episode, Maya is desperate to rekindle their relationship. Them falling out makes sense, but in my opinion, I feel like we don't really know why they should be together. What connects them aside from the fact that they're dating? In an episode, Maya says something along the lines of, I moved to LA, I met Dylan, COVID happened, and then kind of like the rest is history. So maybe that's the point, that their relationship is built kind of on codependence rather than being together because they want to be together and their personalities match with each other, the way a lot of people just get stuck in relationships. But still, her desperation in the last episode just sort of seems out of place considering the rest of the season she doesn't give him the time of fucking day. And in episode 6, she even fantasizes that she's having sex with someone else when she's having sex with him. Sir. With Tallulah, it kind of seems like she just does things to do them. Aside from her freaking out over internet hate for a singular episode, we don't really see why she wants to be famous, why she wants to be an influencer. Through her character, she doesn't really seem to be motivated by money or social climbing. So in the last 2 episodes, when they're trying to get her invited to a very special dinner, it feels like there's no motivation except for the fact that Maya wants her to do it, which could also maybe be part of her character. I know like this show is kind of making a point that Tallulah's social influence is undescribed, like she's just an influencer very vaguely, to kind of point out that they're all sort of the same. But still, within the show, I would like to know a little bit why she like wants to be famous. I will say Charlie does have a nice arc with realizing that he might actually want to be in a relationship and that he values softness within his friendships and relationships. But his storyline feels disjointed from the rest of the cast. Like, if the show was about him instead and then everyone else was different, I don't think his storyline would change, like, dramatically. So to me, it's like, why is he friends with them? You know, aside from something that happened years ago that we don't even know about. And don't even get me started on Alani, which is such a waste of not having her character actually be a character. She's a side character to the fullest. They gave her character a smidge of showing that she's kind of lonely, which annoys me because I think they could have given her such an interesting arc about what it means to be a child of someone who's very successful, and how children of successful people are often fighting tooth and nail for attention and wanting to be loved. Even if their parents are great, which we see Alani's parents are, they're still usually absent. And same with her, we don't really see why she's friends with everyone either. Like, the only pair that we understand why they're friends is Tallulah and Maya. And again, in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be missing things from me just kind of, you know, avoiding watching some of the show, so let me know. Hi, editing Megan here. Okay, I realized I didn't finish this point out, so I'm gonna do it really quick. Basically, the reason I mentioned anthology versus like a continuous narrative is with anthology shows, you're allowed to just kind of skip over shit. Like, you can just ignore something that happened in the episode before if it doesn't really correlate with what's happening in this upcoming episode. You don't necessarily always see, like, the soft, casual conversations because it's focused on kind of a more, like, surrealistic, like, hyper-reality world, which I feel like this show sort of has, which is why I feel like they could have just leaned totally into the anthology style. Because with the continuous narrative, you do need to have the story, you know, flow continuously. You know, like, we expect to see the small casual moments between characters to kind of fill us in on why they're friends, aside from the quirky antics they get into. I don't even know if that makes any more sense, but I hope someone understands what I'm trying to say. But that's just kind of how I feel. Maybe in season 2 we'll understand more of the motivation behind the characters, but that's why I feel that it feels incomplete. Overall, 7 out of 10, deducting a point because the cringe factor was cringe factoring. I don't really know how to end this video, to be quite honest. In the comment section down below, feel free to agree or disagree with me about any of the points that I made, because at this point, I don't even know. I've been thinking about this for like 5 days in a row straight now, and it's been driving me crazy. Much harder than my brain probably ever wanted to think about anything. Anyway, follow me on Instagram, blow me up, let me become an insufferable influencer, an insufferable 2000's core writer, so that I can run around in designer clothes all day and report back on this firsthand. Bye.